Shalom, everyone, and welcome back to the Rashi Nosh. I'm Pastor Matt.
And I'm Kara.
This week, our Torah portion is called Tzav, and we are on page 80 in the book that we are going through, the JPS Rashi Torah Discussion Commentary. And we are looking at a section on page 80 called Change of Clothes. We're going to be talking about the vestments of the high priest. So let's just read this, and then we'll have some discussion questions for you. And please, if you've not done so already, subscribe to this channel, like and comment on this video so that the algorithm will pick it up, and share this on your social media if you don't mind. So, discussing the offerings brought in the tabernacle, Parashat Tzav focuses on the role of Moses' brother Aaron and his sons who served as the priests. It says there in Leviticus 6:4, "He, the priest, shall then take off his vestments and put on other vestments, and carry the ashes outside the camp to a clean place." Now, Rashi elaborates on this idea of the priest's change of clothing. It says, "He shall then take off his vestments." This is not an obligation, but proper practice, that in taking out the ashes, he not soil the garments in which he always officiates. Here's an analogy. The clothes worn by a servant while cooking a pot of food for his master, he should not wear when he pours a glass of wine for his master. Therefore, the verse continues, "and put on other vestments inferior to those." This is Rashi's comment on Leviticus 6:4. So Rashi explains that it would be not appropriate for the priest to officiate over the sacrifices in the same clothing that he may have soiled as he disposed of the ashes from the altar. While dressing for the occasion remains of value today, both the clothing we wear and the societal approach to attire have evolved over time. A century ago, men typically wore suits and hats, and women donned long dresses or blouses and skirts. The 1960s era encouraged nonconformity in many facets of society, including how we present oneself in dress. Since then, clothing styles have become even less formal, a trend reinforced by the prevalence of telecommuting from home rather than working in an office setting. So I think we've seen this sort of the evolution of clothing. I mean, we pastor a church in a beach town, a little town right outside Daytona Beach, Florida. And so in our church, it would not be uncommon at all for someone to be wearing a short sleeve shirt, maybe even a nicer pair of shorts to a church service on a Sunday. That simply would not have been done years ago. In fact, you used to have this idea of your church clothes, or if you're coming from a Jewish setting, your synagogue clothes. Mm-hmm. Now, there is this idea in Judaism of beautifying the commandment, and this is a tradition that I really enjoy. So in other words, the meal that you eat for your Shabbat dinner on Friday night is probably the best meal that you're going to have that week. You probably will use better dishes, nicer silverware, or something like that to beautify the commandment. The same is true in Jewish tradition when we gather for a synagogue service, or if we're in prayer, that we want to dress a certain way. Now, it's not that we should judge people if they don't have nice clothes or things like that, but when we really are talking about, worship, we're kind of coming before the king, and so we should dress in a respectful way. I love it how one time someone told me, however you would dress in court to stand before a judge, maybe that's how you should dress in worship, because you're standing before the ultimate judge. You're standing before the king. So we have seen this throughout our society, even in our government. There have been discussions in recent years about should the men and women of government, should they be wearing nicer clothes? There have been people that have wanted to sort of make that a bit informal and wear sort of street clothes to government events. The tradition in the United States really began to change with a president called John F. Kennedy in the 60s. It mentioned in the article here about the 1960s. That was, we believe, a real watershed moment for men and hats. Men used to wear hats a lot. And every president up to John F. Kennedy, if not all, the vast majority of the presidents, who had all been men up to that point, of course, wore a hat to their inauguration speech. Many, if not most, or all of them. But Kennedy, although during some of the ceremonial things was wearing a hat, a dress hat, he did not on the occasion of actually making his speech, making his inauguration speech. And I can't remember, but it may have been that wind was a factor that day. I can't remember. But the President of the United States did not wear a hat to this speech. And that began, we think, the trend in America of men wearing hats. It used to be, you could see old black and white footage of men at baseball games, at amusements with a suit and tie and a hat, always a hat if they were outside. So things just begin to change, and things are going to change. But I think sometimes we, as leaders in worship settings, can be sort of the caretakers or the arbiters of how far do we allow that to go, and for what reason. So our questions for discussion today are as follows. What do your clothes tend to communicate about you? And is this a conscious message you wish to convey? Now, I will just tell you, I have gotten in the habit in the last few years of wearing shirts with collars. It's not that I don't have t-shirts still, I do. But if I'm doing something in the capacity or in the office of a pastor or a moré, I most of the time will not only have a collar, but most of the time I will have long sleeves. This is one of the few collared shirts that I have that has shorter sleeves. But typically I'll be wearing a long sleeve shirt. If I'm being a bit more casual, I might unbutton the sleeves and roll them up once or twice. But I purposely try to present an image out there of someone who is responsible, someone who's mature, someone who's adult, someone who is in leadership. And this was not necessarily the case when our predominant work was done in youth ministry. In that capacity, if I'm at a group where it's predominantly teenagers, like we just recently had a group of teenagers at our house, I probably won't be as dressed up as I would if I was addressing adults. So that's sort of how I conduct myself now, because I do believe that how you dress does say something about you, or whether it should or not, it makes people assume certain things about you.
Yeah, I agree. I obviously, in my day to day, am very casual. I tend to live in jeans and t-shirts most of the time. But for when we travel and speak and stuff like that, I definitely for those weekends tend to make sure that I'm dressed a little bit nicer for the same reason, to come across as it making it seem like special, to kind of beautify that, because it's this isn't what I normally wear, so that makes it more intentional and special for that day.
Yeah, well, and I think for for those occasions when we're doing very physical, you do a lot of physical things. You do a lot of physical, moving around and a lot of physical work and stuff like that. You're a part of a company that is a cleaning business, so it would not be practical for you to be in a really nice dress, scrubbing the floors and things like that. It's not really practical. So I like the idea that there's one way that we dress when we're casual, and then when we're at an event or when we're in worship or in prayer, I like that there's another way that we dress, and I think that's good, and I think psychologically it makes you behave a different way, makes you act a different way, conduct yourself, carry yourself in a different way. Name an occasion for which how much you dress up or what you wear has changed over time, and what does that imply about you and society? Now, I don't know that maybe I won't address this personally about how I have dressed over time. Well, I mean, I could sort of tie it into the last question as well. I think when we were mostly doing youth ministry, I think I lived in jeans or shorts or t-shirts, things like that. But as our ministry has morphed into working with more adults, I think it warrants us being a bit more professional. But I do think there has been maybe the dressing down, if you will, of society that I was mentioning just a moment ago about even in churches. I mean, I think when I was a kid, I think most men wore a tie, I think, to church. Now, I will say that at the local Messianic synagogue that we're involved in, that is a thing, especially if you're going to be on the platform, especially if you're going to be seen as someone in leadership, then we do ask that those men wear a jacket, wear a tie, because we are an example, and it is Shabbat, and we're trying to, like we said, to beautify the commandment and honor the Shabbat in that way. So I think there has been a kind of change over time. We've kind of already addressed that, but is there anything else that you'd like to add to that about a change in society over time?
Um, I mean, I feel like it's the same thing, whether it's like something like that or even like weddings and funerals, like things like that. I feel like they used to be way more, you're expected to be, really dressed up for those kind of things. And now it's definitely, at least in America, it's definitely way more relaxed. And you might not be wearing a tank top and shorts, but you definitely don't have to be dressed, to the nines anymore. So I think that definitely has shifted
I think I've
over the
even
years.
noticed at memorial services or funerals, it used to sort of be an unwritten rule in the United States that if you were mourning someone, you wore black. And
And
I,
now,
I don't even think that's a thing.
not really. Yeah, because most times nowadays they want it to be more of a celebration of life, and so they don't want it to seem so somber. And so people, have been encouraged over the years to maybe not wear, the dark colors. And so I think that's just bled into most funerals nowadays, at least in America.
I think there is a thing that can be said about I wish that even if society gets more casual in day-to-day dress, I wish there was a thing in our society where we still taught people, even when they're children, that there are times that you dress nicer. There are times that you dress up. I always feel a bit badly for people that, because we're in ministry, we are involved in occasions, weddings, funerals, memorials, services, whatever. And you can always kind of tell the person that's not accustomed to dressing up. And you could tell that they feel a bit uncomfortable or out of place because it's not something that they normally do. And so, I always have a heart for people that, you could just tell a man that hasn't worn a tie since he got married, or maybe never, or worn a jacket, or things like that. I think there's a case to be made that there should be times where we wear nicer things. I think that's a good thing. Just like what Aaron did. I like the idea of, no, I'm just thinking about even, when the analogy about when you're cooking food for the king. I was thinking about how I think I could be wrong. You can correct me on this, but I think the only time that I see you wearing an apron is like around holiday time. Like if you're cooking a lot, it's not like if we're cooking every day that all of a sudden you put on an apron or I put on an apron. And it used to be that we did that because we were wearing nicer clothes. That was a thing. A chef that I love to watch on TV has a whole episode on how to properly tie your apron because that's how, he's almost 90 now. And when he was growing up and when he was being trained as a chef,
That
you
was the
always
culture.
wore
Yeah.
an apron because you didn't want to soil your clothes. But all of us are so casual in our day-to-day lives now. If you make a meal for the family, you're cooking like this. You're not necessarily putting on, especially if you're wearing a t-shirt and jeans, or you're not necessarily putting on an apron. But like if it's Thanksgiving time or some other holiday, I just noticed that, the tradition of getting out grandma's apron or whatever
Yeah.
and putting that on it, it's
Or if I'm cooking something that might splatter.
right. Yeah. So it's something for us to think about. Are there occasions in your life, even besides attending a Shabbat service or attending service at your church, are there times that you dress up? And are there times that you think you should dress up? Should society have occasions where we look a little more formal? I always think it's a good training thing for our young people when they have a homecoming or a prom or something like this, and it's almost like it's like their first time of kind of being an adult and dressing in a tie or in a nice dress or something like that. These occasions are good. It's good for us to have these rhythms of life where we think an occasion is worthy of being a bit more formal. So think about that in your life. And you may want to, in your congregation, if you go to a congregation that meets on Shabbat, you may want to beautify the commandment by dressing a little nicer the way that others do. It's not something that may be required in your congregation, but you may want to do it just to make the day a little more special, just to dress a little nicer, to wear something other than sneakers, to just be a little more, shall we say, fancy, just a little more
Special.
dressed up, a little more special, to make the occasion a bit more special. That's something that you may be inspired to do. Thank you so much for joining with us. It's always a joy to be with you for the Rashi Nosh, and pray for us, as in about a month we're going to be traveling to Portugal, and we'll be giving you more information on that conference in the near future. Thank you so much. Shabbat Shalom and an early Chag Pesach Sameach to you. Shalom.